afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Great to have you all here. I'm just sort of doing my reorientation with the panel and making sure that I've got my head around webinars again after doing that little period where you switch off over Christmas. I hope your festive season, your new year, your summertime break has been everything that you have absolutely needed it to be. I know that I needed it. I needed to do a little bit of downtime and to do a little bit of, I find it interesting. I bang on so much about thinking and how important thinking and learning is that I think that by the end of the year I need to actually ensure that I don't do any. I need to have a period of utter distraction from thought. So, I love to get my head into watching a little bit of cricket on television, and my darling wife tells me that helps her not think as well. It actually helps her become completely unconscious, and that little downtime we found to be incredibly valuable. And I hope you've had sufficient downtime, and I hope you're ready to hurtle into what will be a fantastic 2019 for you. Here today with a webinar around learning mindset, and I hope that the learning mindset webinar that we'll get our heads into today is one that you will appreciate, because I think you'll have some reflections that are both about the people you work with, about the teams you lead, about the learning and the training that you provide. But I think also you'll have the odd moment where you get a little uncomfortable because you think about your own learning mindset. Because I think that one of the things we've got to do, I guess, when we embark on this journey of considering our learning mindset is we've got to actually, first of all, contemplate what does that word mean? What does it mean, the mindset? And if we look at the two syllables within that word, it's about our mind, it's about our thinking, it's about our brain, and it's about setting it. It's about actually deciding that this is what I believe about learning, about the way my mind operates. These are the thoughts, as Darren Hill would say, that I hold to be true. These are the things that I have set upon and I have made them concrete in my mind. And when you start to actually create and learn new things, one of the challenges that we often face as leaders of learning is that we have to first unset our mind. We've got to dissolve some of those things that we've had as concrete in the past, and we've got to be determined that we can actually we can set a new course for our mind. We could turn it in another direction and freeze it there and say, this is now the way that I've set my mind. But when you set your mind to those things, it's really important to understand that it is a choice. So if we can actually get clear about the fact that, I'm not going to be flitting from one thing to the other, what I want to get good at is understanding what are the key principles that sit behind really effective learning, adhere to them, and then not be distracted by other shiny objects that might come along. And so that's what we're on about today, is how is it that we could examine our own mindset so that we could turn it in the direction that we genuinely want it to go in, that will actually fulfill purpose, it will actually mean that it's fit for the purpose that you have in your work, and that you can influence other people by showing them how powerful it is to be really determined about the one mindset around learning. And then it's how you can actually get other people to pick up that learning mindset as well. I've been thinking a little bit about it over the last few days. I talked about how that, for me, the sport and cricket is one of those ways that I get a little bit of downtime. And over the last few days, there hasn't been much cricket on, so I've sort of turned my attention to one other sport. That I tend to be one of those people that I only follow tennis for brief moments every year, and I convince myself that I'm an absolute expert on it, which is totally ridiculous. But I found myself really contemplating the conundrum that is Nick Kyrgios and what's going on with Nick Kyrgios. And I watched his reaction just yesterday, actually, online to somebody criticising his footwork in the way that he plays tennis. So it was on a radio show with ex-AFL footballer Gerard Healy and also former tennis coach Roger Rashid. And Rashid purported that he thinks that a problem with Nick Kyrgios, as well as with a couple of other players, is a lack of fitness and footwork, and that's what's undoing them. And it wasn't put particularly aggressively. It wasn't put particularly critically even by the guys on the radio. Yet Kyrgios' reaction was just like way over the top. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And he jumped onto social media telling them to shut their mouths and carrying on, which pretty much is true to brand for Nick Kyrgios, unfortunately. But you know what? I was talking to a colleague about this yesterday afternoon. I actually reckon, and this is a very arrogant position for me to take, but I reckon I could fix Nick Kyrgios, because I reckon that Nick Kyrgios' problem is not his footwork. I don't think it's his forehand. I don't think it's even his attitude. I don't think it's his behaviour. I don't think it's what he does, for instance, going to underhand serves whenever looks like he's going to lose a match. I think that the problem with Nick Kyrgios is that he hasn't learned how to learn. Nick Kyrgios is a big kid. And to understand that, what we need to do is to go back to school to understand what goes on at school. So if we think about our time in school, or think about what the task of a teacher is in a school, their job is to try and get a whole bunch of kids to learn. And it's hard because of the emotional reaction that people have to learning when they fail. And that's what I think is going on with Nick Kyrgios. So in a classroom with kids, when they fail, the feeling that they feel is shame, and it's so overwhelming that they just react in all sorts of different ways to try and get out of learning from that point, to try and deal with that shame. Most of us deal with shame of failure, the shame of being unable to learn, the shame of not stepping up to a standard. A lot of us can deal with it positively, which means that we'll say, okay, that didn't work, I'll try it this way differently next time, or I'll take this advice on board, I can do it better, I'll be okay, everything will be fine. That's a positive way to handle the sting of shame when it comes along, when we fail. When Nick Kyrgios feels shame, he responds to it negatively. Now, most people respond to shame negatively in one of 4 different ways, and I would suggest that Nick Kyrgios has 2 of these that are his favourite. Number 1 is to withdraw, which means that we just disappear completely. In your workplace, what this looks like is people who don't show up to work the next day after they stuff something up. In fact, they'll often take a sickie that lasts for 3 or 4 days with an ailment that you think is rather dubious. And it's what they're doing is they're feeling that the workplace is now a place that I have failed, and therefore I'm going to stay away from that workplace so that I can not feel this shame for a little while. They get right out of the way. Kyrgios doesn't do that so much. He keeps fronting up to tournaments. Or he actually does fake an injury occasionally, so he dabbles in that one. There's some people avoid shame, which means that what they do, instead of withdrawing, what they do is try to get away from the feeling of the shame by numbing themselves. So in whether people failing at work, and sometimes at work I can get it, that you might have had a really horrible week, but you're just hanging on Friday afternoon to get through the thirsty camel, and if the regular guy there thinks that it's a 6-pack kind of Friday, he's probably got another thing coming because this is slab territory. It's been such an awful week. I get that feeling, but it's when people struggle with shame, feeling that it's not just work, it's life that they're failing at, and they've got to numb themselves to that feeling constantly, that we have real serious psychological concern for those people, because that's where alcoholism, drug addiction, and indeed even workaholism can come from, is when people are trying to avoid the feeling of failing. We get people who attack themselves, so they turn on themselves and they say, I suck, I'm terrible, I know I'm hopeless, I can't learn. And that's really sad when that happens, but I think we need to understand that psychologically what's going on for those people is they're trying to make the situation static. And what I mean by that is that if it can be about them, you can't expect me to try a new strategy, because the problem's not strategy, the problem's me. So it's a defensive mechanism to turn it upon yourself, and then you get people who attack other. And this is what Nick Kyrgios does. And the reason we attack other people when we fail is because our mindset towards learning is that when things go wrong, it feels so terrible that I need to find someone else to blame. And so Nick Kyrgios, within a couple of days of losing in the first round of the Australian Open, has been able to blame Roger Rashid, he's been able to blame Jared Healy, he got stuck into a reporter in a press conference, and he's immediately jumped online, and on his Twitter account he's picking fights with any number of people and having a go at people. And why does he do it? It's a wonderful distraction. It's just a distraction. What you can do if you're feeling immense shame from the result of failure is that you get busy whacking other people and blaming other people. Leighton Hewitt has been one that Nick Kyrgios and his mate Bernard Tomic have got stuck into over the last few days, and it's convenient to me that they only get stuck into him after they lose, because this is a total shame response. And I think we see this in our workplaces every single day. And in fact, what I'm on about here is trying to fix your Nick Kyrgios. You've got someone in your organisation who has a mindset around learning that leads them to feel shame, that leads them to feel that this is not working for me, and when people feel that it's not working for them, then they struggle to actually engage effectively. So if I was to try and fix Nick Kyrgios, I would try and fix his attitude to shame. I would try and fix the things that he says in his head to himself that he needs to do when he fails, because unfortunately he's chosen a career where failure is inevitable. And what we need to do if we're looking to change the mindset that we have amongst the people that we work with is to change the attitude that they have to the way that they learn. So it's first of all about unsetting their mind that learning needs to be sometimes boring, that they think that learning is irrelevant. They think that learning is something that they are mandated to do. And so often they think that learning is transactional. Now, what I mean by that is they think that learning is a knowledge-based activity, which means that somebody is trying to make me take the knowledge that they have and to put it into my own brain's suitcase. They're trying to have me add extra stuff that I need to carry around. So they think that I might have to pay for a course and someone will teach me something, and that's the way that learning works. And we don't want them to think that learning works that way in a contemporary environment. In fact, our goal is to shift the internal dialogue that they have as a result of their mindset around to things like saying, oh, learning is intriguing. Learning's curious to me. Learning is useful. Learning is kind of a growth-oriented experience, and learning is transformational. Learning is something that gives me the opportunity to be a better employee. In fact, be a better team member and even a better person. I think back to my own experience as a leader, and one of my first forays into leadership was in school leadership, and had the wonderful opportunity to be assistant principal at a very large school with a young teacher there who I thought was just oozing potential and also oozing anger. And Shannon was one of my favourite people is one of my favourite people on the planet now. She wasn't at the time, and I was doing everything I could to try and teach Shannon to fill the gaps that Shannon had, such that she could become a better person. Shannon was overcoming some real personal challenges as well, in that her partner had unfortunately passed away as a result of a workplace accident, and so Shannon walked around with a dark cloud above her head that was entirely understandable. But my approach to Shannon was flawed, and it was flawed in that I was treating her learning as though it was a transactional experience. And what I needed to do was, instead of just constantly dropping professional readings into Shannon's pigeonhole, or showing up in Shannon's classroom and trying to engage in what she was doing and giving her advice and telling her how to improve, what I needed to do was to work with Shannon and show her that learning could be a transformational journey that would spread beyond her work and into her life. Now, when I started to actually connect with Shannon personally and change her mind about learning and improvement, rather than just try and give her additional things to do, that's when we started to get some shift. And I'm just delighted that Shannon is now a school leader herself and is transforming the lives of not only, she's transforming schools, and not only doing that, but transforming the lives of some of the really disadvantaged young people that she works with in Canberra. And I think she's awesome. She was my Nick KYRGIOS, though. She wouldn't learn. When will she ever learn is the sort of exasperation that I had in my head. And the truth is, what I needed to do was to first change her mindset. So we're taking a deep dive into mindset today. I want to give you, though, hopefully, 6 things that will help you today to be able to step into working effectively around changing mindset, such that your people are more likely to accept both the transactional and transformational elements that sit within learning. So it's kind of a ridiculous or lofty goal for me to do that. So I want to remind you, first of all, that we can make sense of this together a little today by getting you involved. So there's some people that I can see on the webinar today whose names I don't recognise. So there's some new people here today. So welcome to those people. I want to remind you that the webinar today, look, there's a tendency around your own learning today on a webinar to already have a mindset, and that is that a webinar is a TV show. Adam is just a voice on a screen, and I'm going to watch this episode for the next 45 minutes or so and get out of it what I can. That'll be great. I'll be entertained, hopefully. Hopefully Adam will do a good job, and we'll see how we go. I would prefer that we take the mindset of this being an interactional opportunity today. And so therefore I want to encourage you to get involved. You will see on your screen a GoToWebinar control panel, and I want to encourage you to use it. There's a couple of ways you can use it. First of all is that you can put your hand up. It's just like I mentioned the regular old school classroom just before. It is just like that. So make sure that you use that opportunity. If you do that, I've got a little microphone button here that I can unmute you and I can hear your question. So if you've got a Nick Kyrgios whose mindset you are trying to change such that it's possible to have them learn something or grow it all in the workplace, and let's hear about them. Let's chew on it together, because I've got this funny feeling that if we solve your Nick Kyrgios, that you're going to be of benefit to somebody else in the room today as well. If you're feeling a little shy, you will see that there's either a question or a chat box section in the GoToWebinar control panel. If it's a question about content and what I'm speaking about today, whack it in there, and I'll pause at some stage and we'll dwell on your question a little bit. And even if it's a question about the tech, if you can't hear properly or if it's not something's not working for you today, our Real Learner's incredible business manager Chris is online today. She's a bit of a tech whiz, and she's going to be there to help you out today. A couple of other ways we're going to help you is that, for instance, don't be writing copious amounts of notes today to try and keep up. If you look in the handout section of the panel that's in front of you today, the slide deck from this webinar is sitting there ready there for you. So you can just print that out. You can just download it. You can print it out. You can do whatever you wish with it. It's there for you. You'll be able to go back over that later on. And also note that we are recording the webinar today. And as a follow-up to everybody who's here in the room with us today, we're going to send you that recording as well. So you'll be able to watch it again if you need to. So I guess today, don't use this as an opportunity to try and just make the webinar transactional by just writing down as many things as you can possibly remember. Relax, step up, get involved, and let's make this an experience that can really work for absolutely everybody. All right, so it'll feel like we're going way too fast, but know that there's some opportunities for you to soak this learning up a little bit later on. Okay, I mentioned before what I'd like to do today in the webinar is I even put in the blurb, in the description for this webinar, that while we're sort of starting with the ethereal and talking about learning mindset, what I'd like to do is to get as practical as possible about how you can build that learning mindset in yourself and in others. And I've come up with what I think are 6 ways that genuinely effective leaders of learning tackle this task. And number 1, I think, is that they manipulate feelings. Now, this sounds horribly manipulative, and it's because it is. And I do but firmly believe that the manipulation of feelings is one of the most important things that an effective leader of learning can do. Excuse me while I take a sip of water. And it sounds like an awful thing to do, but the reason that I say manipulate rather than, we've tried to soften the word manipulate over the years with things like, to influence feelings. But I actually like us to be a little bit more intentional about it than influence. I would like us to be really clear about what are the feelings that we're trying to generate. Now, when it comes to the learning environment, feelings can often get in the way of learning. Now, there's a biological reason for that, because in human beings, as you may have noticed, we're not particularly good at thinking and feeling at the same time. If our feelings are incredibly heightened and extreme, whether they're positive or negative, so you see people who could be incredibly happy. For instance, they win Cats Lotto, or they are proposed to by their long-term love, and they actually say words like, "Oh, I'm speechless. I was speechless at that moment." They actually couldn't generate the thought required to produce language, okay, because the feelings that they were feeling at that time were so extreme. And it works the same in terms of negative feelings as well. If we're incredibly frightened, if we're worried, if we're stressed, if we're angry, those tend to be feelings that if we're felt extremely, and a lot of negative feelings are very easy to feel extremely, there tend to be feelings that inhibit thinking, because as human beings we're either feeling using the limbic system of our brain, or we are thinking using the neocortex of our brain. And a little beast called amygdala in our brain, it kind of works like the traffic cop and decides whether we're going to use one or the other. So effective leaders of learning are always thinking about, how is it that I could generate the right level, which means not extreme, and the right positivity of feeling, So feelings of contentedness, feelings of curiosity, feelings of safety, feelings of interest. Arthur C. Clarke said, where there is interest, there is learning. They're the people that are genuinely creating an environment where people tend to learn and grow the most effectively. I'm always thinking about this manipulation of feelings whenever it comes to things like performance conversations. We hope that performance conversations are going to be opportunities for people to grow. And yet, I know that I go back to a teacher that I worked with when I was a school principal, and every time I brought him in for a performance conversation, I could just see a panic across him that didn't particularly lend itself well to a great, honest, and meaningful conversation about his performance. And about the second or third time that I tried, I said, mate, what's the problem? I said, every time I sit down with you and talk about, I said, we talk all the time. And I said, I see you all the time. And I said, you're so relaxed and so honest with me and everything's so fine. I said, but if we sit down in my office and have a chat about your performance, I said, you get the sweats up and you look really uncomfortable and you sound defensive. I said, what's the go? And he said, look, and he sort of joined the teaching profession late in life. He'd been a mature age graduate into the role. And he said, look, I wasn't probably destined to be a teacher. He said, in fact, school was the last place I thought I'd end up working. He said, in school, he said, I played up. I got myself into trouble a lot. And he said, there's something about walking into the principal's office that just wigged me out. So every time I spoke to him in the staff room, in the yard, or in the classroom, he was right as rain. But he said, there's something about this office that just, it brings all the, nothing good has ever happened to me in a principal's office. I said, wow. And I thought, how can I manipulate it? How can I manipulate this conversation? I realised, why is it that I need to have this conversation with him in my office? And so just occasionally I would say to Mick, hey, why don't we duck up for a beer on Friday afternoon after work? He said, oh, really? Oh, yeah, mate, my shout. We'd duck up and I'd buy him a mid-strength beer, and we'd sit there and I'd start asking him questions about his work. And he went, one day he said, this is a performance conversation, isn't it? I said, it is, mate. He goes, oh, well, at least it's not in the principal's office, I suppose. I said, can I get my laptop out? He said, go for your life. And we filled out the pro forma that we needed to do for performance conversations, and we got it done. And it was a far more effective experience. It wasn't because of what I said. I changed nothing of the strategy. But what I did do was hold the conversation in an environment that would manipulate a different kind of feeling for him, that would generate a different kind of safety for him. And he was able to learn, able to grow, able to make decisions, and they are the hallmarks of a really terrific learning opportunity. So hugely important that we manipulate the feelings that are going to be generated out of the learning opportunity that we're creating. And I certainly think that one of the primary considerations that we make there is location and geography. So let's think about where we're going to have those conversations and what's likely to make people feel those positive yet not extreme feelings in that moment. The second thing that I want to put to you today is that what we need to do if we want to effectively generate great learning is to build upon success. So what I would contend to you when it comes to learning is that a lot of great learning is built on identifying and then addressing gaps, which means for most people they get a slight KYRGIOS moment where failure is identified and made clear, and they start to feel shame as a result of that failure being identified, and they either throw everything out, or they go, oh, you think that I'm hopeless, or they are just distracted in some other, like I mentioned, 4 ways that people can be distracted from thinking and learning because of the presence of shame. So what we need to do is to actually genuinely and effectively focus on strengths. I noticed this through from the very informal all the way through the formal interactions that I have with people, both in my home and in the workplace. I noticed it with my wife. So my wonderful Anthea, who's just who's just my absolute rock in my life, but she still hasn't trained me well enough that I get all the questions right that she asks me. So Anthea can walk out. We might be ready to go out. In fact, we're heading out tonight into the city, and I anticipate this being something that I will need to navigate this evening. She'll walk out with an outfit on and say to me, hey, how does this look? And I could look at that outfit, and even with my horribly uneducated eye for fashion, I might, for instance, look at Anthea and think, I don't like those earrings. And if I say to Anthea, I don't like those earrings, then she goes, oh, okay. And I can sort of see the bubble burst in her. And she turns around, she walks back into the bedroom, and she doesn't come out with different earrings on saying, is this better? When Anthea comes back out again, she usually doesn't ask me how she looks, because I have focused on the negativity here and the gap. What she does is she comes back out with an entirely new outfit on. And I'll say, I only said that I didn't like the earrings. I said, you didn't need to change everything. And she goes, no, you didn't. You said you didn't like the way I looked. And so when people, when we focus on gaps and look to only address challenges, we miss the opportunity to put people in such a mindset that they can see through the situation clearly. I've learned this when I work with Anthea. So what I need to do now when Anthea does come out, and I'm mindful of this for this evening, is when she comes out and she says, how do I look? I just say, I love the way that T-shirt works with the jeans. And she'll go, what about the earrings? And I go, well, I don't know, you could try the other ones if you like. And I'm working from a strength perspective. So when I'm talking about working from strength in the way that you're going to change people's mindset for learning, there's a couple of things that I want you to be aware of. One is to be really, really mindful of your language. And that is just mindful of working towards strengths, not weaknesses. People take their weaknesses in the way that, particularly the way they conduct themselves, the way they grow, the way they learn, they take them incredibly personally. So what we want to do is to be aware of that and to not generate negative feelings as a result of it feeling like they're being criticised personally. If you have someone in your team, for instance, who is arrogant, it's very, very difficult to sit down and say, you know what, let's have a bit of a chat about your arrogance. And the problem with that is that people aren't seeing themselves as being arrogant. Arrogant people see themselves as being confident. And so what we need to do is say, hey, I've noticed that you're an incredibly confident person around everybody else in the workplace. Yeah, look, I really think that I've got my head around this now and I know how to do things, and I'm an impatient person, I suppose. And okay. And then we might be able to ask them then, have you thought about the way that confidence could rub off on someone else? And if we can get them to realise that other people could perceive them as being arrogant, because arrogance is a perception, then we might be able to talk about conduct that would have them perceived in a different way. So talking to them about their strength of being confident rather than the negative, rather than their weakness of being arrogant, is a good way to talk about it. If you want to talk to someone who's late for work all the time, somebody who's just the latecomer, who's the tardy one, talking to them about their laziness is unlikely to solicit a great response. They don't think they're lazy; they think they're laid back, and they think they're flexible. So we need to talk to them about that and the way that that has been perceived. In terms of growth, building upon success is, nearly got there the wrong way then didn't I? Building upon success is just an easier thing to do than to build upon failure. Now, those who know me, I'm going to keep the sport metaphors going through one more sport for just a moment. Those who know me know that I'm a fanatical Richmond supporter. And if I learned one thing in the AFL about Richmond's premiership in 2017, it's that they were terrible at the end of 2016. They were focused on everything that they were doing wrong. And there's a fabulous book by Conrad Marshall who wrote about the transformation that happened at Richmond. And he said all that it began with was the opportunity for them all to sit down and say, well, instead of looking at everything that's wrong, why don't we look at what we're really good at? And they discovered that there was one thing that the players on their list had that other clubs didn't, and it was speed. And so they said, instead of focusing on the fact that we're not tall enough, instead of focusing on the fact that we're not strong enough, instead of focusing on the fact that we're not old enough or experienced enough, why don't we just focus on the fact that we're fast? And what do you know? The growth and success that was such that they jumped from 13th position on the ladder to first position on the ladder. So it's hugely important that we start to build upon success rather than failure. It's a far more sturdy platform to move forward. I want you to also think about how you can reframe failure. I want you to also think about, because it's one thing for me to say I want you to be incredibly positive in the way that you work, but what I'm not suggesting is that you become outright Pollyanna and say that everything's fantastic even when it's falling apart. But what we do need to do is have people not have that horrible negative shame approach when it comes to failure. Now, I think that most leaders are becoming increasingly aware, at least, that they need to reframe the way that failure looks in their organisation. And I think that sometimes we deal with it quite superficially. We'll do things like put up on the, I'll put a poster up in the staff room that says, failure is just, FAIL, first attempt in learning. And I'm going to admit that I kind of vomit in my mouth a little bit every time I see that poster. It's not about just saying that failure is just a first attempt in learning. We have to learn that and believe it. And we're not going to believe it just by seeing a poster. So what we need to do is to practice that with the people that we work with. Whenever I'm teaching a social skill, such as the ability to deal with failure, the ability to be able to experience shame and to be able to move past it productively and experience it positively, I go through 3 steps. The first one is that I'm going to language it. So I'm going to tell everyone in my organisation that it's okay to fail. And the way that I usually language it is with a story. I will tell them about a time that I screwed up and it wasn't the end of the world. I will tell them about a time that I made a horrible mistake and I discovered a wonderful little nugget of learning under the rubble of my errors. So I'm going to language it in some way that it is okay to fail here. It is okay to screw up. It is okay to make a mess. And we want to get that language. So to that point, the poster does that much, but no more. The second thing is what you want to do is you want to practice it. So you want to give people an opportunity to do the failing. And the best way to give them a chance to practice doing the failing is to give them a non-threatening or a fun opportunity to do it. So part of what comes into a lot of my learning programs when I'm running a workshop and I want people to take risks is I'll run an activity even with Lego. And I will tell them that I want them to build me a house that reminds me of my time in the Northern Territory in Darwin. Tropical features, that's all I tell them. You've got 4 minutes, work as a team, go. And they build this wonderful house. And almost invariably at the end of the 4 minutes, I tell them that their house was completely wrong. There was no elevation to it. There was no animals there. There was no outdoor area for me to cool off. There was no barbecue. The features just for a northern house are just not adequate. And I usually smash it with a lovely little mallet that I carry around with me. And they feel that horrible sting of shame and they're desperate to blame someone. So they go, oh, that's not fair. You're going to smash it anyway. This is stupid. I don't like this activity. I'm not doing the next bit. So you get some people and then you get some people who go, okay, what are you up to here? And I'll say the next challenge is this. Here's your feedback. And so I tell them that what it is they needed to do to be able to build a house to that level. And then I say, and this time what I want to do is give you half the time. You know exactly what you need to do. You have all the instructions. You've learned from your failure. Go. And people almost every single time build a better house in 2 minutes than they did the first go in 4 minutes. Because what failure does is it improves efficiency. The learnings that come from failure improve efficiency. They also build resilience in the people that you're working with. And we know that we would all love a more resilient and robust workforce. And the reason that it's doing that is because you are embracing a truly important element of learning, which is the ability to learn by trial and error. And unfortunately, this is the one way of learning that both our schools and our businesses have allowed to drift by the wayside, which means the people that you're getting into your workforces haven't learned to stuff up enough. They haven't learned to make mistakes, to learn from them, and then halve the amount of time that it takes them to do things because they haven't been put in that position. And when you give people a chance to practice that, then what happens is that you can expect it in the reality. So the 3 steps are, if you want people to learn how to fail effectively, first of all, language it. Second of all, practice it in something fun and non-threatening. And thirdly is to expect it in the reality. Now, in reality, what you're going to have to do here is to build a high trust environment, which means you're going to have to do what you're going to say, which means be ready. Be ready that when somebody does screw up and you feel like talking to them about the gap, you feel like talking about what they go wrong, we need to actually try to position this as an opportunity to practice what we preach by saying what's under the rubble, what's there that we need to learn from so that we can become more efficient, more resilient, and that we can get the benefit of having learned through trial and error. Now, if I were to give you an example of what it means to reframe failure, if I was to try and if I was working with your staff today and I was going to say to them, what does it look like to learn by trial and error? I would show them this next little clip that I'm going to show you right now that has kind of done the rounds a little bit in social media lately, and I thought that it was an absolute ripper. See if you can pick up a couple of little nuances and look at the little things that make this an effective example of learning by trial and error as you watch the next minute or so.
More funny.
It's an awesome little clip. I really like it. And there's a couple of things that stand out to me in it. Number one is the persistence required by the little girl and the growth, the progress that she makes. We could look, it would be easy to look at the several failures that she has in there. I think there's about 7 or 8. Several failures. You have to go fail, 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 fail. But it's only when you look a little deeper into it, you realize how much closer she's getting. There is progress evident here that we need to celebrate. And you can see that a couple of the other things that I notice in there is the role of her coach, the role of the leader of learning in this situation, is to come back in to refocus, to make sure that they are encouraged to be able to move forward, and that they are also encouraged to give it another go. There is progress here. You can do this. You'll be fine. A fantastic piece of learning has been generated by a wonderful professor called Shigata Mitra, who runs the Hole in the Wall experiment, which means he uses computers in the slums of India to try and bring education to these poor disadvantaged students. The way he does it is he brings grannies from the UK online for an hour or 2 a week, and he reads stories to. He gets them to read stories to these kids and with these kids. And some of these grandmothers, they say, well, we don't know how to be a teacher. He says, you don't need to know how to be a teacher. You just need to know how to be a granny. Just use the theory of the granny, which is to encourage them. Tell them that's wonderful. Tell them I believe in you. Tell them this is fantastic. Tell them that you want to see more. And they do, and we've got these grannies giving up a little bit of their time, dozens and dozens of them now, giving up a little bit of their time once a week and reaching hundreds of young children across India and helping education reach them. I think the third thing that stands out for me in this short little clip is what you can see on your screen right now, which is the look on the face of the coach. And this is where leading of learning becomes fantastic, when through trial and error is such a motivating thing, and it's not because of the trial or the error, it's because of the success that eventually comes from it. And you can see the joy that's not only been experienced by the little girl when she gave the rather guttural yeah, but you can see the smile on the face of the coach there. This is achievement. This is what genuine achievement looks like, and it brings a wonderful affect to your organisation that will be an incredibly big driver of productivity as you move forward. The fourth thing I want to talk to you about today is the idea of training the brain. And what I mean by training the brain is that I want you to end the notion that when you gather to learn something that it needs to be a transactional piece, that your meetings need to be one person delivering information to another person. What I want you to do is to start to look to incorporate into your gatherings, into your meetings, however it is that you get together in your organisation, opportunities for people's brains to get better, opportunities for people's capacity to be improved, for their state to be changed. And the way that I've liked to do that over the years is to present, first of all, different problems to them. So instead of delivering information in meetings, what I look to do is to deliver problems. I'll say, this is on my mind. And the truth is that when I'm the leader, if it's on my mind, then it's probably on theirs already, and it's probably already on their gossip, I used to call it a gossip feed. It's a bit like a Facebook feed, but there's a feed, there's a certain amount of topics that get a good run in terms of gossip. And if it's a problem for me, it's a problem for them. They're just languaging it differently on their gossip feed. So what I would often do is, instead of saying what I think the solution is, or trying to find someone to blame for the problem, I'll just say, I think at the moment we've got a bit of an issue with morale. I'm wondering if you could talk about that at your table, and then let's hear what you've got to say, and so we can work on that together as we move forward. So get their input. When it comes to people believing that a leader is fair, I talk to the fact often that there's a process involved in being fair, and there's 3 E's. And the first E of that process is engagement, which means if there's a problem to be solved that involves people, get them involved in it. And sometimes that just is about saying, here's the problem, what do you reckon? instead of here's the problem, this is what I reckon, this is what we're going to do. That's a delivery or transactional way of problem solving, meeting and learning, and I want us to get out of that. You can set people up to that. So one of the ways that I often do it is to provide them with irrelevant problems. So I'm going to give you one. I'm going to give you one today, an irrelevant problem, just something that I want you to think about today. Here it is. This is an unusual paragraph. I'm curious, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I can see that there. I'm curious as to just how quickly you can find out what is so unusual about it. It looks so ordinary and plain that you'd think that nothing was wrong with it. In fact, nothing is wrong with it. It is highly unusual though. Study it and think about it. You still might not find anything odd, but if you work at it a bit, you might find out. Try to do it without any coaching. I wonder if anyone here could just, for a moment, would you just use the question box for me? If you know what's unusual about this paragraph, pop an answer in. I'm going to give you just a minute. I'm going to go silent so that you don't have to work through my language. I'm going to give you just a moment to write in the question box if you think you can spot what's unusual about this paragraph. Can you solve this problem? Go. Okay. All right. Ian, congratulations, congratulations. I thought that I was going to be left hanging there for a moment, but Ian's jumped in. The most common letter in the English language is the letter E, and it appears not once in this paragraph. So, well, congratulations, Ian. What I can guarantee while you were having a look at this is that all of a sudden, if you were treating it a little bit like a television show, is that stopped all of a sudden. Instead of just sitting passively, you may have even changed the way you were sitting. You may have leaned forward. You started studying. You started engaging. You started getting involved, and you started problem solving. So providing problems for people, like I said about the morale example, but also providing just little problems that help people to think at a higher level, particularly levels that involve problem solving, are a really cool thing to do. There's one I often run, there's a heap that I often run with my people just to encourage higher levels of thinking and make them to believe that there's a cultural norm in our organisation around collaboration being around solving problems that are worth solving. I often give them problems like, for instance, okay, I want you to have a chat at your table here about, just before we get started today, is about how do you most want to be seen at work? And people go, what are you talking about? I go, let me give you 10 labels. And I'll say to people, you could be seen as being either honest, loving, smart, adventurous, cooperative, independent, talented, attractive, successful, or creative. How do you want people to see you at work? And the conversation that they have is just quite extraordinary. And it's because they're doing things like synthesizing, they're analyzing those labels, they're discriminating, they're ranking, which are all higher order thinking things to do. What that means is that when it comes to actually doing something work-related, they have been primed to think at a higher level than just thinking that meetings and learning are about sitting there and waiting for someone else to pile their facts into my head. Training your people to be more capable to solve problems is a hugely important task that a great effective leader of learning will tackle with gusto. The last two things that I want you to really get your head into, first of all, is to obsess over progress. We love scoreboards as people, whether we're in competition or whether we're in collaboration. Seeing progress on that scoreboard is incredibly motivating. It's one of the reasons that even as an educator of kids, I struggle a little bit with this notion that some junior sports have about removing the scoreboard. I know that when my own son was playing under 10 football and his match finished, and there was no scoreboard. At the end of the game, the kids when the siren rings at the end of the game, half of the team put their hands in the air and half of the team put their heads down because they already knew they were keeping score in their head. We're obsessed by progress. That's what it's about. It's not about putting people up or putting people down. And I could say to my son, there was a good game of footy. He goes, I know, I think we won by 21 points. It's like, wow. So obsessing over that is incredibly important. If you've got a project that you're looking to tackle in your organisation, make a feature of it in the tea room, where you put the markers up on the wall and people can see how far they, which markers they've got across and which is the next one that they need to get through. If you've got stages and standards that you need met by everybody, putting the number up there of the number of people who have reached that stage and how it is that we're supporting the people who are not yet reaching that stage can be a really useful thing to do. If you've got you need to hit a certain target, instead of just holding people to account for whether they hit, for instance, a sales target or not, which is a binary experience that provides either a heightened sense of for instance, ecstasy or shame. We're going to show people how close that we're going to obsess over the progress rather than whether the standard has been met in one way or another. A really important thing that I want you to just keep in mind as you move forward. And then the last thing I want you to do is to make sure that you focus on learning together. If we want to get the impression across to people that this isn't a battle, then we need to construct our environment such that they don't look like a battlefield. And I would contend that the contemporary learning environment that most of us picked up from our school days, where there is a teacher at the front of the room who is going to line you up and face you like that you're you're a battalion on the battlefield ready to charge, that's not the right way to set it up. In fact, when I run my learning experiences, I'm often conducting the room. For instance, if I'm facilitating, we're in a circle. And it's not because we're going to sit in a circle because there's a wonderful little bit of fairy dust that I'm going to sprinkle over everybody and everyone's going to get along. It's just because the circle implies the absence of power. And when the teacher, the facilitator, the leader stands at the front of the room while everybody else is at a lower position by sitting in seats and they're all lined up like they're on a battlefield, it implies incredibly strongly that there is a power play at work here. Now, as much as the picture here reminds me that we're going to solve problems together, I would genuinely hate to be solving that puzzle, considering that there's no pictures on the puzzle. It looks like a terrible puzzle to have to solve. So I'm not sure that I'm interested in that. What I do want you to do is to think about how you can create learning environments where we are looking to move towards a target, towards a stated objective, and we're genuinely going to be positioning ourselves to do that together. I did a keynote presentation not so long ago for a TAFE, for a learning organisation, who were very much, I could see the expectation in the room. I was introduced like any other keynote presenter at the conference. I walked to the front of the room and put my notes down at the podium, and I watched the heads and the shoulders of other people in the room slump, because the signal, the priming that they've been given is that when the person reaches the podium, you're now in a position that you are going to sit, listen, and do nothing for the next 45 minutes or so. And I thought, I'm not prepared to tolerate this. So I thanked them all for their attention, and I told them what we're going to do is work on this little issue together today. And I went and spotted a seat that was vacant in the middle of the room, and I went and just presented my keynote from the middle of the room. And I asked people at the end of the keynote, what did you notice about this as a learning experience, just because I worked from the middle of the room? And they said, number one thing that they noticed was that their engagement was higher. They said they felt that they paid more attention. Number two, they said, was that there was no awkward silence when I asked for questions. I said, because it felt like we were all already involved on going on this journey about learning how to learn more effectively and how to lead learning more effectively. It felt like it was normal to ask questions to make sense, and it felt like it was expected that they should be able to hit that marker. Because when it's a keynote presentation, often the marker is, can you sit still and shut up for 45 minutes? But when we actually change the learning environment and we put the quest in front of ourselves to learn about something and say, let's just have a crack at this and see if we can do it together, the engagement level of people goes up significantly. I asked the audience then how many of them had made a decision in that 45-minute period about something that was going to be done differently tomorrow. And my estimation is that about 80% of the people in that room put their hand up. I asked people again then how many people have made decisions like that regularly in keynote presentations, and a lot of the hands went down. So I think that it's really important that we eliminate power from our learning environments whenever we have the opportunity to do so. It isn't always possible, but whenever we have the opportunity to do so, and to position the opportunity to learn as something that we're going to do together. And then I think you get some pretty cool stuff to happen. Okay, I'm going to leave you with that. But before you go, next webinar that we're going to run on the 14th of February on Valentine's Day is going to be at 2 p.m. and it's going to be all around the attitude, the learning attitude. So this is going to be a step sort of sideways from this idea of the learning mindset, and it's about how it is that you can specifically turn around the attitudes that people have towards learning and get people excited. This one's about building genuine enthusiasm for learning in your organisation. So I really hope you'll come along to that. You're going to get in the follow-up email from this webinar today, you're going to get the opportunity, you're going to get a link, and you'll be able to register for that one straight away if you'd like to. And we, of course, would love to have you there. I also want to just give you that last reminder that the slide deck from today is there for you in the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. So jump in there now and steal that before you leave the webinar today. And I also just want to remind you that, like I mentioned before, a lot of the work that we do through Real Learners and through Adam Voigt Education Solutions is geared around helping organisations such as yours to be able to progress in this space. So if you're looking for someone who can come and run a keynote like I mentioned, if you're looking for somebody who can come and facilitate some of these workshops and learning opportunities for people in your business, then just reach out, give us a bell. Drop us a line and we'll see if we can make that happen for you as quickly as you possibly can this year. I had somebody yesterday say, that they realised that they were lucky, they said, to find me, which I thought took as a compliment, because they're in charge of running a conference this year, and we wanted to make sure that they didn't have just another keynote presentation where all those heads drop and those shoulders slump. So if you're looking for something like that, give us a bell. Happy to help you out. Thank you so much for coming along. Enjoy the beginning of another really busy but hopefully productive and hopefully full of growth and learning 2019. Hopefully that can be the hallmarks of it for you. I'll see you in Feb. Okay, bye for now.